So first up we have Demon Companion. This is a dual class card for Demon Hunters and Hunters. 1 mana, summon a random Demon Companion. And the Demon Companions are basically just half of an Animal Companion. So there's like a 1/2 Leok, a 2/2 Misha, and a 2/1 Huffer, all with the same text and keywords and whatnot. So I think this card does seem pretty efficient. All of those as a 1-drop are pretty good. 1 mana 2/2 Taunt is probably the best of them, but 1 mana 2/1 Charge is quite good, and you probably don't want to get the Leok thing on turn 1, but depending on the point in the game, just dropping a 1 mana thing that gives all your minions +1 attack can be quite strong. Of course, Demon Hunter does have like a ton of really strong stuff they can play, but I think this probably does make the cut. You're usually going to want to play Battle Fiend or even Battle Mage on turn 1 over this, but it doesn't hurt to have something else that's playable on turn 1, but also maintains its value in the later game a lot more compared to like a Battle Mage. So I think this card is pretty solid in an aggro Demon Hunter. I mean, it might not make the card in Demon Hunter because Demon Hunter has like 60 broken cards, but it seems pretty reasonable. I think it could also be pretty fine in any Hunter deck. Highlander Hunter deck, I think, is probably pretty interested in another pretty efficient 1-drop. And again, even in the Hunter class, it still scales pretty well into the late game. And I think even like aggro or Dragon Hunter or whatever, those are probably fairly interested in this card as well. So it's just a solid card overall, I would say. Next we have Double Jump, another Demon Hunter card. For 1 mana, you draw an Outcast card from your deck. So the interesting thing about this is when you tutor your Outcast card, it obviously when you draw it, it goes to the right side of your hand, so it's always the Outcast is immediately able to be activated. So that is pretty strong. It is just 1 mana draw a card though, which is like, if you're not tutoring something specific, I don't think is super strong. But given how few Outcast cards actually see play, I think current Demon Hunters really only play Skull of Gul'dan, it is a pretty efficient tutor. Like if you can just always, basically you give yourself 4 chances to draw Skull of Gul'dan with this card. If you include 2 copies of this card, that can be quite good. Depending on the meta, being able to pull an I-Beam out of your deck can be pretty nice as well. And of course there are some new Outcast cards in this set. Maybe you just really need to tutor Glide, depending on the matchup. I'm not a big Glide fan, but I mean, that's certainly something you could do that's not unreasonable. I do worry a little bit though, that perhaps Demon Hunter just has too much card draw for this to really see play. Like, is this better than Skull of Gul'dan, Chaos Strike? Is it better than, there's like a new 2-drop that draws a card. Spectral Sight is a card that Demon Hunter has access to right now but doesn't even play. Basically, Demon Hunter just has a ton of card draw, and I'm not sure that you necessarily need another card draw card, especially one that is usually going to be drawing into more card draw. But maybe Demon Hunter just ends up being built in such a way that you really just want to draw through your entire deck. Maybe they play like fewer just good minions and more burn stuff. Maybe that's something they could do with the Soul Fragment card, since they're like getting that new weapon that goes face. And shit, maybe at that point you can even like play Zephyrus in your Demon Hunter, in your aggro Demon Hunter, because it just draws so many cards. So that could be interesting. I certainly think the card is reasonable to play. Next up we have Trueaim Crescent for Demon Hunter and Hunter. 1 mana 1/4 weapon. After your hero attacks a minion, your minions attack it too. So as a 1 mana 1/4 weapon, it's pretty similar to Light's Justice, which is, you know, maybe not a great place to start with this card. But we saw from Candle Shot that a card really doesn't have to be that much better than Light's Justice to see some play. Like, this loses a durability over Light's Justice and ended up being a very strong card. And I do think the upside on Trueaim Crescent is certainly powerful. You can basically, like if you're wanting to play really aggressively, you can send all your minions face, and then you can like attack this into some threat and have your minions kill it. So basically you can get your minions to go face before being traded off, which is pretty strong. I'm not sure if you can do it in the other order, like if your opponent has some stupid little taunt minion. I don't know if you can like run this into it, send all your minions into it, and then still attack face with your minions. I think you probably can do that, which could be pretty good for taking out like Bone Wraith or something like that. But it's also just like 1 mana deal 4 damage over the course of the game, which is pretty solid as well. And if there's a lot of tokens in the meta, it's just good at cleaning up tokens without having to invest mana in your hero power. I think it seems like a pretty solid card. It also notably pairs really well with the legendary Ace Hunter Kreen, where your stuff has immune while attacking. So this makes all your stuff attack, that gives everything immune. You basically just get to kill whatever you run into for free. Now, both Demon Hunter and Hunter actually already have pretty good weapons that they play. So like, I don't know if Hunter wants to give up Desert Spear or Stormhammer for this. Maybe it just plays all 3 weapons. Similarly, Demon Hunter has Umberwing, which is a very strong weapon it might not want to give up. And Demon Hunter at least is getting a new weapon in the set. So a lot of weapons between these 2 classes. But I think this card is probably strong enough to see at least some amount of play. And this last point isn't really super relevant for Demon Hunter, but in Hunter, you can use this as like a Death Rattle activator. Not really sure if it's particularly good with any Death Rattles that Hunter currently has, but they're getting a new like egg type thing, or you can also play Serpent Egg, and this can be an activator for these sorts of Death Rattle minions. So yeah, a lot of applications for this card, a lot of cute stuff you can do, but it's also just a pretty efficient weapon, and it's pretty efficient at controlling the board, so I think the card is quite solid. Next up we have Vilefiend Trainer, 4 mana, 5/4 outcast, summon 2 1/1 demons. This is a lot of stats for a 4 mana card. What is it, 7/6 worth of stats? But the way they're spread out is not super good. I mean, the card is definitely like efficient enough to be an interesting card, but for Demon Hunter in particular, I really just feel like Demon Hunter has so many good cards, and they're getting like a bunch of new good stuff in the next set as well, or in this set as well, and I just really can't imagine this card making the cut. Like, yeah, we currently don't really play any 4-drops, but I think I'd rather just play better 3s and 5s than include this card in my deck. And also, as an outcast card, it is a little bit clunky. If you're not getting the 1/1s out of this, it's obviously pretty weak. And if we are looking at 4-drops with outcast to be playable, I think this might just not be as good as Illidari Fellblade, which already doesn't see play. So, I'm not a big fan of this card. I think there have probably been like points throughout Hearthstone's history where certain classes would have been able to play this card, but not Demon Hunter right now that has a million broken things they can be doing. Next up we have Blood Herald, which is a Demon Hunter / Hunter dual class card. 5 mana 1/1, whenever a friendly minion dies, while this is in your hand, gain +1/+1. I've actually seen a lot of people just really shitting on this card. I've seen people say it's like the worst card in the set, and I don't know if I would go that far. I mean, it's not that difficult to have stuff die while this is in your hand. It starts getting pretty playable after like 4 buffs, and then once this thing gets up to like an 8/8, it's just a pretty solid thing to play on curve. And it can get really out of control and be like a 20/20 or whatever. Demon Hunter has... They have the, Coordinated Strike and Command the Illidari. Those are things that really put a lot of juice into the Blood Herald. Umberwing as well. Even just like Satyr Overseer is a pretty good activator for this card. Hunter obviously has some pretty good stuff as well. I mean, they have this entire Quest Hunter archetype that's based on throwing a bunch of crap on the board. Desert Spear is good with this. Snake Trap is good with this. Unleash the Hounds. Swarm of Locusts. So I actually think it's not that hard to really get this thing to be pretty big. But going back to the previous card I reviewed, I don't really know that... I mean, like, Demon Hunter is so freaking good, right? So I don't know that this is necessarily a card that's going to make its way into Demon Hunter. And if we look at actual good Hunter archetypes, Highlander Hunter isn't really just playing a bunch of token stuff. And I don't think it's really that good of an idea to just jam token stuff into this. And if you're just playing like one thing on curve every turn, this thing is going to, on curve, at best be a 5/5, which is just not good enough. So I think that's pretty underwhelming in a Highlander Hunter type deck. And then if you're looking at like Face Hunter, which, like Face Hunter does play Toxic Reinforcements, and this could be quite good. Like, this summons 3 things that die pretty easily, which could be good with the Blood Herald. But it's just not the kind of card that Face Hunter wants to be playing, because you want your opponent to be dead before you're, or like when you're playing this card. So I think it's one of those cards that's like underrated, but still bad. At least that's how I feel about it for now. Next we have Fel Guardians. 7 mana, summon 3 1/2 demons with taunt. Costs 1 less whenever a friendly minion dies. So this is very comparable to Corridor Creeper. And I'll admit it, I was one of the people that missed Corridor Creeper in the card review. But I don't think this is quite Corridor Creeper 2.0. For one, this is friendly minions only, whereas Corridor Creeper was all minions. But I do feel like Demon Hunter is pretty good at discounting this card. We just looked at a bunch of token stuff that they have when considering the previous card. They have the Coordinated Strike, Command the Illidari, and like Umberwing is really strong as well. So Demon Hunter does discount this pretty easily. And I think if you're playing like 3 mana for 3 1/2 demons with taunt, that actually is pretty strong, and anything cheaper than that is pretty good as well. But it's not quite as good as a 5/5, which is what Corridor Creeper was when it was dominating the meta. And again, I just feel like there's so much competition in Demon Hunter. This card is pretty bad if you're playing Outcast stuff, because it can just block your Outcast and be hard to get out of hand. It's also just like, for a similar reason, it's a terrible top deck. And with all the card draw that Demon Hunter is potentially playing, you probably don't want your top decks to be that bad, because you want to be able to like draw into, you know, Glide or Skull of Gul'dan or whatever, and then play the stuff that you draw off of that. It's kind of hard to do that with Fel Guardians. So I think the card is maybe just like a little bit sketchy, but it's a solid enough card, I would say. But probably not a top 30 Demon Hunter card. Next we have Ancient Void Hound, another card for Demon Hunter. 9 mana, 10/10 demon. At the end of your turn, steal 1 attack and health from all enemy minions. So in one body, this is a giant minion that becomes an even bigger threat and kills your opponent's stuff. It steals 1 health, so if it only has 1 health, the thing will just actually die. So it's a bit of an AoE. But as far as a 9 mana card goes, that is a pretty inefficient AoE. And also as far as a 9 mana card goes, like as a 9 mana threat, this does just kind of die to, you know, Shadow or Death or, you know, Time Warp or whatever. So it's not really that strong of a threat, I would say. I mean, if like turn 9, your opponent has, if they played like Whispering Woods or whatever the previous turn and just have a bunch of 1/1s in play, sure, it's like a fast 9-drop that does something relevant. but in practice, that 1 damage AoE is just really not going to be that impactful. I mean, it's kind of similar to Baron Geddon, in the sense that it's a threat that AoEs some stuff. Obviously, this doesn't do the damage to your face, which is like kind of one of the reasons that Baron Geddon's not so good anymore. But mostly Baron Geddon is just like way too slow, and this card is even slower. So for that reason, I think this probably won't see much play. Demon Hunter does have some demon cheat stuff that they can play. They can cheat this out with a Fel Summoner, or they can pull it off Pit Commander. Pulling it off Pit Commander is probably pretty good, although it doesn't immediately trigger its end of turn effect since it comes out at end of turn. But big Demon Hunter hasn't really been a thing, and even in that deck, this card is pretty slow. So, I don't know, like a scaled down version of this, like a 6 mana 5/5 or something, would be insane. But at 9 mana, I think it's just going to be a bit too expensive to really be competitive. Next we have a Druid card, Gibberling, or Gibberling, I don't know. But I probably do need to learn which one it is, because I think we'll be seeing a lot of this card. 1 mana 1/1, Spell Burst, summon a Gibberling. So when you summon, like when you Spell Burst this, it loses its Spell Burst, but the Gibberling that's summoned still has Spell Burst. So basically every time you cast a spell, you summon another 1/1. So I've seen people say that this is a 1 mana Violet Teacher, basically, which seems like a pretty appropriate comparison. And with Druid having such efficient, cheap spells, you can go like turn 1, Gibberling, Innervate. There's the new Lightning Bloom thing that's a 0 mana spell. You can play it with Nature Studies in the same turn. You can really just flood the board as early as turn 1, and even cap it off with a Power of the Wild or something. You can do that like pretty consistently in Druid. Today they had the Theory Crafting streams for the super elite top 16 streamers. And yeah, I saw some turn 1 plays that had 7 minions on the board. So this card looks pretty insane to me. I think it's going to probably define an entire archetype of Druid. And it seems like that archetype might actually be pretty competitive and extremely degenerate. Probably feels awful playing against this card. This might even like shift the meta to make cards like freaking Whirlwind see play, because you have to be able to answer the Gibberlings on turn 1. And even if you're playing Whirlwind, if they happen to hit the Power of the Wild, you still just lose. So this card's pretty nuts. It might be just like, it might be a bit of a day 1 card, because cheesy aggro decks tend to be really strong in an unrefined meta. But it's also possible that this ends up being like a top 5 card in the entire set. Next we have Partner Assignments, also a Druid card. 1 mana at a random 2 cost and 3 cost beast to your hand. So let's take a look at beasts. We look at 2 cost beasts. We got some 2/3s, a 2/2. Seems like they're mostly pretty efficiently statted. Not too many stinkers among them, if you're just considering randomly generating a 2 cost beast. Looking at 3 cost beasts, we're probably more familiar with these because of Exotic Mount Seller. And for the most part, 3 cost beasts seem pretty reasonable as well. So it seems like the value that you get out of this card is quite fine. And it's just like a curve filler card, right? You play this on turn 1, like off your mulligan, you keep this and Overgrowth, and then you just have a 1, 2, 3, 4 curve. And even if the beasts that you're playing aren't super great, you're probably just pretty happy having stuff to play. This is also like minions, but in spell form, so you can play this in a Fungal Fortunes deck without having to risk overdrawing stuff. similar with Glowfly Swarm. So I think this card has some applications. I don't know that it's necessarily going to be high impact enough to make the cut in Druid, and it does seem like Druid is getting some ridiculous shit in this expansion. So it might be, like I was talking earlier about Demon Hunter, cards that are like good, but not a top 30 Demon Hunter card. I feel like this could be good, but not a top 30 Druid card. Although it is potentially, probably one of the better places for it would be in the Gibberling deck, because you do want cheap spells, and this is a cheap spell that's also like reload after you just totally blow your load making 1/1s on turn 1. So in that archetype, I could certainly see some use for this card. Next up we have Forest Warden Omu, a Druid legendary. 6 mana 5/4 with Spell Burst, refresh your mana crystals. So the most degenerate thing I've seen with this card is when it's combined with Germination. I talked earlier about Gibberling, and this kind of is like Gibberling, where you play your Omu, you germinate it, and when you cast Germination, it triggers the Spell Burst, but the copy that you get off the Germination still has its Spell Burst. So you can go Omu, Germination, go up to 10 mana, and then you go Malagos, Moonfire, and that Moonfire Spell Bursts the second Omu, so you go back up to 10 mana, and then you can go like Moonfire Swipe Swipe. So you can get a lot of mana in a single turn as this card. You don't have to do something quite that degenerate though. You can just like turn 6, Omu, 0 mana spell, and then play Emerald Explorer or something. That on its own is just quite strong. So overall, I would say this card is just quite strong. The low end on it is pretty strong, and then the top end on it is, you know, you kill the opponent from full health with Malagos. It is definitely a situational card, and definitely a card your deck needs to be built to abuse, because obviously you need to be playing some cheap spells for it. But I think in the decks that know how to abuse this, they do abuse it pretty damn well. Next up we have Runic Carvings, a spell for Druid and Shaman. 6 mana, choose 1, summon 4 2/2 Treant totems, or overload 2 to summon them with Rush. So either way, you're getting 4 2/2s, and the choose 1 is whether or not you're willing to overload 2 to give them Rush. So 6 mana for 4 2/2s is maybe not super strong, but it is a board reload, and they're Treants. So in that sense, you compare it to like Force of Nature, which has seen play in Treant decks, 1 more mana for an extra 2/2, and then the upside of you can also just choose to overload and give them Rush. Definitely seems like a competitive card in a deck that cares about Treant synergy. And there is still quite a bit of Treant synergy in Standard. Goru the Might Tree. We still have like Forest Aid to make more Treants. We have Aeroponics, of course, which is the best one. This card is actually an enabler for Garden Gnome. So, very strong card in a Treant Druid deck. But it might also just be like a pretty good card in general. If you look at it just as an AoE card, 6 mana, deal 8 damage kind of as you choose to your opponent's board. So you can just like kill, you can kill like a Glaive-bound Adept, a Satyr Overseer, and a 2/2 Satyr. That's pretty efficient. Or you can just kill some 1-drops. You can even like value trade over the Beaming Sidekicks and the Fell Wings from Umberwing, and then you leave some stuff in play on top of your AoE. So it seems like a reasonable AoE card as well. And even, like, it's at its best when it's value trading over totems. But even if you're just up against, like, Highlander Mage or something, and you want 6 mana, deal 8 to Siamat or something. That's like pretty solid as well. So all around seems like a pretty reasonable AoE card. But on top of being an AoE card or a removal card or whatever, you can also just play it proactively, which is pretty nice. A lot of the downside of playing like a Flame Strike or something in your deck is that sometimes it's just totally dead, and this is like never totally dead. I do think that Druid, similar to Demon Hunter, kind of just has too many good cards. So maybe this doesn't end up seeing much play in Druid, but it is also a Shaman card. And the Treants are also totems for some reason. So maybe it sees play in Totem Shaman? 6 mana, make 4 totems. That really makes like Totemic Reflection, Splitting Axe, Totemic Might, Totemic Surge, Bloodlust. It makes those cards pretty hard to deal with. We saw previously the Totem Goliath, the 5-drop that dropped basic totems. I think this might just be a better reload than the Totem Goliath and Totem Shaman, but it might still end up being a little bit too slow, a little bit too clunky of a card for a deck like this. But it's also more incentive to just up the curve a bit. Maybe you just go double Runic Carvings and double Totem Goliath and just have so much reload that they eventually can't deal with it. So that could be reasonable as well. And this could also end up in Control Shaman. For both Shaman and Druid, it's also an activator for Groundskeeper, the 4-mana 4/5 taunt that heals for 5. So that could also be pretty good. There's a lot that you can do with this card. It can fit in like aggressive mid-range control archetypes. It can go in 2 different classes. It enables some stuff like the Groundskeeper and Garden Gnome. So a lot of application for this card. It's good proactively and when you're behind. So I could actually see this card being pretty competitive. Next up we have Survival of the Fittest, a 10-mana Druid spell. Give +4/+4 to all minions in your hand, deck, and battlefield. So this is obviously an insane buff, but it costs 10 mana, which is a ton. They did show on the reveal stream for it, this being played with Kael'thas, and it certainly does seem like this card's insane if you get the perfect Kael'thas draw. But I don't know how often that's going to happen. Even without Kael'thas though, I guess it really doesn't always take super long to get this in play. I mean, it is a Druid card, so you've got Overgrowth, you've got Breath of Dreams, maybe Wild Growth, so you really can ramp up to 10 mana. This card would clearly be unplayable in any class other than Druid. But even for Druid, turn 10 is like kinda far away. And I'm not really sure what deck this fits into. Like if you're playing the Kael'thas thing, you want to be playing a lot of spells for Kael'thas, but the more spells you play, the fewer minions you're playing, which makes Survival of the Fittest less impactful. But then there's like Big in Druid, which, you know, likes buffing stuff in their deck, but that deck doesn't ramp nearly as efficiently. You can try to play it as like a big Savage Roar, but you're spending your entire turn to do that, and if you don't have a board, then it's kind of a sad card. I don't know. Definitely a big clunky thing. My instinct tells me that if a Kael'thas deck isn't viable, this card probably won't see too much play. And I'm also not even super convinced that this is one of the best things you can do with Kael'thas. But when it pops off, it pops off. That's for sure. Next we have Adorable Infestation for Druids and Hunters. 1 mana, give a minion +1/+1, summon a 1/1, and add a 1 mana 1/1 to your hand. So this card does a lot. Give a minion +1/+1 and summon a 1/1. That's pretty comparable to Alley Cat, a card that was pretty good in Hunter. But then it also adds a thing to your hand, so sort of better than Alley Cat. But the thing is, compared to Alley Cat, you can't really play Adorable Infestation on turn 1 because you won't have anything to buff. And I'm pretty sure you can't even cast it if you don't have a target. So it's not really a 1-drop, which definitely makes it look a little bit sketchy. But it's also just a card that does a lot. You can play it, if you're playing a lot of 1-drops, you can go like turn 1 Dwarven Sharpshooter, and then turn 2 buff it and play a Cub. So a lot of times I think this is going to be more of a 2-drop than a 1-drop. But it's pretty efficient at that. You turn your 1 mana 1/1, your 1 mana 1/3 into a 2/4, and then play something else along with it. That is pretty strong. In Druid in particular, I talked a lot about the Gibberling. I think this card's pretty insane in the Gibberling deck. You just want 1 mana spells that play for tempo, and this does exactly that. The main downside of this card is that even though it does a lot for its mana, it's still not really like a high impact card, and you can only play so many of these cards in your deck. So like, I don't know that Highlander Hunter would necessarily want to play this card. They do only play a very small amount of 1-drops, so even as a 2-drop, this is a little bit difficult to play. And then it's made even more difficult to play because you can't really target Fairy Dragon or Imprisoned Felmaw depending on the turn. So it's definitely a situational thing. But I think in aggressive decks that care about like token synergies, just having a lot of stuff in play, I think this is pretty good. Certainly good in the Gibberling deck. Maybe good in like Quest Hunter. That could be a thing as well. I think this card could certainly be good. It's good enough to see play, I would say, but it definitely depends on the archetypes in the meta. Next up, we have another Druid/Hunter spell called Guardian Animals. 7 mana, summon 2 beasts that cost 5 or less from your deck. Give them Rush. So if we just search for Beast, and then scroll through what Druid has available to them, doesn't really look like Druid does much with this card. Looking at Hunter, I mean, we can give our, augmented Porcupine Rush, something like that. Doesn't really seem great. You can pull out a Tundra Rhino, so that instead of Rush, your things can charge, but it only pulls out things that cost 5 or less. So I don't really know what you're charging with a Rhino that looks super impactful. And as far as neutrals go, it doesn't really seem like there's much that's too impactful. So if this was added to the game today, I don't think it would see much play in either Druid or Hunter. But Druid is getting some really insane beasts to go with this card. And with those beasts, this card is like actually pretty nutty, I would say. And it looks like it's potentially going to be the cornerstone of a new Druid deck going forward. Even with new beasts, I'm not sure that this card is particularly great in Hunter, but as a Druid card, it's quite solid. So the first of our Druid cards to enable Guardian Animals is going to be Twilight Runner, a 5 mana 5/4 beast with stealth. Whenever this attacks, draw 2 cards. So compared to Stranglethorn Tiger, we lose 1 stat point to draw 2 cards. That is a very good trade-off, and Stranglethorn Tiger is like already a reasonable-ish card. So off of Guardian Animals, this is, for 7 mana you can potentially get 2 5-power minions with Rush that draw you 4 cards. Very strong. Or just like one of these and another decently statted beast. Very strong off Guardian Animals. But this card is also just like good on its own as a 5-drop. Play it on 5. It has stealth and 4 health. So you're almost always going to get to attack with this. Not too many Chaos Novas or whatever coming down on this turn. So 5 mana 5/4, always gets to attack and draws 2 cards. Not really a ton to say about this card except it's insane. It could potentially be like the top end in a Gibberling deck, but I think 5 mana is a bit too much for that. It doesn't really fit Fungal Fortunes decks, so I definitely do think there are archetypes of Druid that won't want to play this card. But in the Guardian Animals deck, it's insane, and if there's any like Embiggen Druid or anything like that, it's pretty insane as well. Worth noting that Embiggen is not super good with Guardian Animals because it would like make this cost 6 mana, and then you wouldn't actually pull this off Guardian Animals. So I don't think Guardian Animals and Embiggen are the same deck. but if they are separate decks, they will definitely both be interested in this broken card. Next we have Teacher's Pet, a Druid Hunter minion, 5 mana 4/5 beast with Taunt. Death Rattle, summon a random 3-cost beast. So earlier we looked at 3-cost beasts for the Druid spell that added a 2 and 3 cost to your hand, and you've probably seen 3-cost beasts off of Exotic Mount Seller. Turns out 3-cost beasts are generally pretty reasonable, although you are sad to hit Desert Hare. But overall you probably get like a 3/3 or a 2/3 on average or something. And a 5 mana 4/5 Taunt that drops that amount of stats is just a pretty efficient minion. I think this is not nearly as strong as the last beast we just looked at, but you do need a certain amount of beasts in your Guardian Animals deck, and I think this is probably the second best thing you can play, so you probably play it in your Guardian Animals Druid. And similar to the last thing, if there's like an Embiggen Druid or something, you probably play this in there, but I'm definitely not as stoked about it. If Hunter plays this card, I'm not really sure. It is just pretty efficient. I've seen it compared to like Sludge Belcher, 5 mana, 5 health Taunt. This has more attack than Sludge Belcher, and the thing it drops out has more stats than a 1/2. So it's just an efficient card. But does Highlander Hunter want to play this? I don't know, maybe. They don't really have that many 5s. And I think there's some chance that Highlander Hunter wants to slim down so they can play Lorekeeper and top out at Dinotamer Brand. So like maybe this could find its way into a Hunter archetype based on that. Or maybe there's a Beast Hunter archetype because there is the Shando Wildclaw or whatever that card is called. I'm pretty sure that's it. And Hunter still has like augmented Porcupine stuff from the previous set. So in a deck like that, maybe Teacher's Pet is pretty reasonable. Maybe pretty good in Quest Hunter as well. It's kind of similar to Bone Wraith, which I'm pretty sure they play. Next up we have Speaker Gidra, a legendary for Druid and Shaman. 3 mana 1/4 with Rush and Wind Fury. And Spell Burst, gain attack and health equal to the spell's cost. So how much do we need to Spell Burst for this to be good? If we Spell Burst a 1-cost spell, this is a 2/5 with Rush and Wind Fury. For 3 mana, I think that's actually kind of okay, but probably not quite good enough. But really, like anything that costs 2 or more, I think you're pretty happy with this card. Say that you just like Wrath one thing, and then you have a 3/6 that can rush into 2 other things. That's a very solid anti-aggro card. But really, it's not like this has to be an anti-aggro card. Like if you just play, I don't know, Power of the Wild or something, and then play this as a 3/6 with Wind Fury on turn 5. Like that's a pretty decent minion as well. And then of course the scales very well into the late game. So say you're Druid and you're playing like, I don't know, turn 10 with Overflow, you get an 8/12 with Rush and Wind Fury. It's pretty freaking strong. Like sometimes the drawback of a big spell like Overflow is that you can't actually play it without dying, and Speaker Gidra is pretty good at reducing your opponent's board so you don't die. So I think this card seems pretty competitive. It's better in Druid than Shaman, because Druid can like ramp, and the more mana you can spend with this card, the better it is. But I think it's probably just good in both classes. Seems pretty reasonable that you could go like turn 6 and play this with like a Lightning Storm, clean up all of their little shitters with the AoE, and then trade off into their big stuff with Speaker Gidra. Very solid. I think this is a good card in both classes, and it's certainly good in control, and it might even just be a solid enough minion for aggro and mid-range decks to play as well, if they're playing a reasonable amount of spells. Next up, a Hunter spell, Carrion Studies. 1 mana, discover a Death Rattle minion, your next one costs 1 less. So let's take a look at the Death Rattle minions available to the Hunter class. They do have some pretty good stuff. I mean, they have like a Death Rattle archetype going for them. Picking up a Hellbore or another Porcupine in this deck is pretty solid. Picking up another Zixor Apex Predator can be pretty good for this deck. On the top end, you have like Savannah Highmane, which is quite competitive. But once you start getting into the neutral cards, there are some kind of bad ones. Like, I don't think you really want to be picking up Jar Dealer and Rust Sworn Initiate, Infested Goblin. Definitely a lot of sketchy Death Rattle minions. So I'm not sure that I'm totally in love with this. You can also play these Studies cards as like a ramp type effect. So if there's a good Death Rattle minion that you want to be playing, you can basically like discover something with this, and even if it sucks, you just never play it. And then you can play like your 5-mana Death Rattle minion on turn 4. So you could cheat out like Teacher's Pet, the 5-mana 4/5 with Taunt. And that could be pretty solid. That's also just a solid addition to the pool for this card. But overall, I'm not sure that there are that many Death Rattle minions who are really super interested in cheating out. So this does just sort of seem like a value card, which I don't really know that Hunter is that interested in playing. Like, I can't see Highlander Hunter playing this. Highlander Hunter, like, already plays very few Death Rattles where you could get much use out of this if you happen to whiff on it. And it's definitely, like, too slow for aggro or Dragon Hunter or whatever. So, not a card I'm super excited about, but it's certainly, like, reasonably costed, I would say. Next up, we have Bloated Python, another Hunter card. 3-mana 1/2 Beast, Death Rattle, summon a 4/4 Hapless Handler. So this is another pretty good Death Rattle for the Carrion Studies we just saw. And it's actually a bit of a curve. You can go Carrion Studies on 1, and then turn 2 Bloated Python. And then your turn 3 could be like Terran Gorefiend is probably one of the better things you could do. Or even just playing like good Hunter cards. Hunter has a lot of good 3-mana things they can do. But I don't know that this necessarily pushes the Carrion Studies too far. It is just kind of a good card on its own, though. You can compare it to Devilsaur Egg, a 3-mana 0/3, which actually saw quite a bit of play while it was in Standard. Obviously, the Death Rattle, a 5/5 is better than a 4/4, but on an egg type effect, which I would say Bloated Python is sort of an egg, having 1 attack power is really strong because it means you don't need an activator. You can just trade this off. So overall, I would actually say this is a better card than Devilsaur Egg. But the thing is, like, when Devilsaur Egg was in play, or was in Standard, so was Playdead. And Playdead was, like, one of the reasons that Devilsaur Egg was a good card. I'm not sure that Bloated Python really has as significant of synergy in Standard right now. We do have Mok'Nathal Lion, which is certainly good. We have Terran Gorefiend, which is also good. So I do think this is a reasonable card, but I don't think it slots into Highlander Hunter or any other existing Hunter deck. It definitely needs to be a new Hunter deck. So it kind of just remains to be seen if Death Rattle Hunter with like Mok'Nathal Lion and Augmented Porcupine, like if there's enough stuff for this to see play. We got Shando Wildclaw, which is good in this deck. We got some other support for this deck. But I think it's really just the Python is looking at this archetype and seeing if it's finally going to be viable. Next we have Overwhelm, 1-mana Hunter spell. Deal 2 damage to a minion. Deal 1 more damage for each beast you control. So some more Beast Hunter support for the Porcupine Mok'Nathal Lion deck I was just talking about. At its baseline, this is 1 mana, deal 2 to a minion, which is honestly a pretty fair card. I mean, Arcane Shot does occasionally see play, but mostly because it wants to go face. A more appropriate comparison would be to Holy Smite. This is 1 mana, deal 3 to a minion, and I think it's pretty easy to get Overwhelm up to a 3 damage card. You only need 1 beast in play. And at 1 mana, deal 3, it's definitely a competitive card, but it can really just scale pretty easily past that. I think it's pretty common that in the later game, you could go, like, depending on your opponent's board state, it could be extremely powerful. to go Unleash the Hounds and Overwhelm, and then your Overwhelm does like 7 damage to their big thing, and your Hounds trade into their like lackeys or whatever else they have sitting around. That's actually quite strong. And really, I think just pretty much any deck that plays a lot of beasts is pretty interested in this card. It's also a 1-mana spell, so if there's a hunter deck that's interested in spell bursting, this is pretty good for that as well. Current hunter decks don't really play enough beasts to support this. Highlander Hunter only plays 2, so I don't think Highlander Hunter just wants to play what is usually going to be 1 mana deal 2 damage. But depending on the hunter decks that are competitive, this certainly is a playable card. Next up, a hunter minion, Wolpertinger. 1 mana 1/1 beast, battlecry, summon a copy of this. So that's a pretty good activator for the Overwhelm. 2 beasts to make it 1 mana deal 4 pretty easily. But it's also just a solid card on its own. You obviously want to compare it to Alley Cat. Very, very similar card to Alley Cat. But compared to Alley Cat, this has synergy with hand buff effects. So most notably, probably, if you draw this with Scavenger's Ingenuity, it's going to be a 3/3, and then when it copies itself, it's going to be, 1 mana for 2 3/3s, which is quite strong. And Hunter does have a couple other hand buff effects. They have Scrap Shot, which is good with this card, makes it a 4/4, and they have Hellbore, which just Hellbore curved into this is quite strong as well. So it just seems like a pretty reasonable card. If there's a Beast Hunter, you're definitely interested in playing this. If there's a hand buff hunter, you're interested in playing this. But unlike the previous cards we've looked at, I think this is just good in Hunter. Like Highlander Hunter only has a couple reasonable 1-drops they can play right now. I think you can play Wolpertinger in Highlander Hunter. Currently they play so few beasts because they want Scavenger's Ingenuity to be hitting Diving Griffin or Zixor. But you're pretty happy. Like, this is a beast that just naturally has additional synergy with Scavenger's Ingenuity. So I don't think breaking up the package for that is bad. Wolpertinger could definitely be good in here. And could be good in aggro Hunter as well. Or Face Hunter, I guess is what people usually call it. It just seems like a pretty good card overall, I would say. Next we have a Hunter Legendary, Professor Slate. 3 mana 3/4, your spells are poisonous. So we got a nice spider tank stat line. That means the effect on this doesn't need too much help to be competitive. And that's good, because if we look at the hunter spells that deal damage, there really aren't that many that are reasonable to play. Like, we're not trying to kill command a minion to kill it, that's just sad. So I think for the most part, we are looking at Arcane Shot, Rapid Fire, and maybe Corrosive Breath. Now, Rapid Fire in particular is really strong with this, because for 5 mana, you can assassinate 2 things and get a 3/4 in play. That's quite strong. Arcane Shot's not quite as good, but it's still a 4 mana assassinate that makes a 3/4, which is quite good. The problem is, it kind of just seems like there aren't enough spells to enable this. You could maybe try to just like jam it into Highlander Hunter, but Highlander Hunter currently, I believe, only plays Corrosive Breath that has support with this. Like, yeah, you can put in Rapid Fire as well. Maybe Arcane Shot. I think we decided that Overwhelm is probably not going to make the cut in Highlander Hunter. But even if you do play one of each of those, that's still only 4 enablers for Slate, which makes it kind of an inconsistent card. So I don't think this is going to make the cut in Highlander Hunter, especially since Highlander Hunter already has a ton of 3s. I don't think it's going to make the cut, but like the Rapid Fire, the Arcane Shot, the Overwhelm, they're also pretty good Spell Burst enablers. So if for whatever reason Highlander Hunter wants to be forcing Spell Burst cards, those are the cards you want to do it with, and then Professor Slate would pretty easily slot into that deck, I would think. But that's if Highlander Hunter, or really any Hunter deck, wants to go in that direction. And I don't know that they necessarily will. I've talked a bit about this like Death Rattle Beast Hunter thing. I don't think they're really interested in playing that either. So Professor Slate finds himself in kind of a weird spot. Definitely a very high power level card, but one that I think might struggle to find a home. Next up, we have Krolusk Barkstripper, a hunter minion. 4 mana, 3/5 beast. Spellburst, destroy a random enemy. So this is Deadly Shot on a stick, pretty comparable to Rotnest Drake. You do have to enable it with a Spellburst though, so I don't think it's quite as good as Rotnest Drake, which kind of just like, it sort of just kind of activates itself because you don't have to commit another card when you play it. But I do still think, like, Rotnest Drake is an obscenely powerful card, so being worse than that doesn't necessarily make the Krolusk Barkstripper unviable or anything. 4 mana 3/5 is pretty efficient stats on a minion. And then, like, one of the things about these random destruction effects is if your opponent has a Lackey and a 12/12 Edwin, you kind of just have to 50-50 it, like if you want to cast Deadly Shot or whatever. But just the nature of the Spellburst on this card, if you activate it with like a Rapid Fire, you can just shoot the smaller minion and then guarantee that your Spellburst effect is hitting the Edwin. So that's pretty solid. That does make this card look somewhat competitive. I've talked about this a bit, but I don't know that Highlander Hunter really wants to be drawing this off Scavenger's Ingenuity. And I do think it's a bit too slow for like Face Hunter. So if this is going to find a home, I think it's probably going to be in some sort of Beast Hunter. And, you know, it's a beast, so that's pretty good. This also could potentially see play off of Guardian Animals, if that card ends up seeing much play in Hunter. I don't know that it's like super sick. Usually when the thing says 5 or less, you kind of want to be looking at 5, and this is only a 4. But if you can go like Guardian Animals and then pull out a couple of these, and then you cast your Arcane Shot or whatever to kill the small thing and then 2 big things, that can be pretty powerful. But I think this is another card that might struggle to find a home, depending on which Hunter deck is the best at the moment.